Okay, we're now live. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, good evening, folks. Welcome to the February 2023 regular Board of Education meeting. I'd like to start by recognizing and acknowledging the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, may I have a mover to approve the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, seconded by Trustee Kwan. Do we have any changes or amendments to the agenda? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just in G1, G2, and G3, which is, I believe, disclosure of in-camera minutes. I just wondered with the pack-up, I noticed that the dates weren't included on the Section 72 reports, and I know that that's an issue with software of some sort. So just wondering if we can make those changes when we do the minutes for tonight's meeting.
Yeah, and we can maybe just note that as an update to our agenda as well. Thank you for pointing that out. There's one more amendment I wanted to move, and I wonder if we could just move them together, folks. And it was just to add under A3, it would become A3B, and this just is the second set of minutes. So we would be adding an A3B, which is the 20th of June, 2022 regular board meeting minutes. So A3A would be the minutes from our previous board meeting in January, and then A3B would be 20th of June 2022 board meeting minutes. All right, may I have a mover for those amendments? Trustee Kwan, are you happy to move both? Thank you. And a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi. Do we have any discussion, trustees? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the amendment? And that is unanimous. All right, so we have an amended set of minutes. Wondering if someone would like to move the amended minutes, please. Thank you, Trustee Kwan. And a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Carmichael. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, thanks, folks. So let's move right into our minutes then. So at A3A, we have our January 30th board meeting minutes. Were there any changes or amendments to those minutes? Not seeing any hands. Let me know if I've missed you, as always. No? Okay. All right, may I have a mover then? Who would like to move those minutes? Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and a seconder. Trustee Bayo, thank you. All right, all those in favor of the January 30th minutes? And that is unanimous. Thanks, folks. Okay, so we added the 20th of June 2022 minutes to board meeting minutes to our agenda. I wanted to move an update to those minutes. Just bear with me a second. So under F question period, we inadvertently missed adding a question that was asked by a member of the public under F question period. And so I'd like to move an amendment to those minutes in order to address that discrepancy. May I have a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Now let me just read the question into that we'd be adding to the minutes under F question period. And the question was as follows. In the past 2 months, the district has spent close to $200,000 on legal fees while the Supreme Court heard a recently concluded case involving 2 suspended trustees. In this case, does the board agree that the decision to pursue legal action against trustees was both optional and avoidable? And can the board explain why it opted to litigate this case at its students' expense instead of investing the district's resources into programs that benefit students more directly, such as music, programming, custodial staffing, and so on? And further, so that's the question. And then the second aspect of the amendment would just be to reflect in the minute that the question was ruled out of order by the board chair at the time. trustee Painter. And let me just, what I'll do is I'll email, because I know that's quite a lot. I'm just emailing that to trustees and also to the minute taker, because I know that's a lot to take in. Okay, so you should have received the amendments, and so that's just to wrap up an item that was inadvertently excluded from those minutes. Do we have any discussion? All right, hearing none, may I well, I'll call it to a vote. All those in favor of the amendments to the 20th of June 2022 minutes? And that is unanimous. All right. Thank you very much, trustees. Let's move us on to the next part of our meeting. So, business arising, do we have any business arising from the minutes? I just have one piece of business if my colleagues don't. I just wanted to follow up. During our last meeting, we did table discussion of our budget advisory committee terms of reference, and we were going to, we directed the superintendent to go back to each of the 4 houses just to discuss what they'd like to see in terms of their representation around that budget advisory table. So I wonder if we can get an update on where we are with those discussions.
Thank you. Through the chair, we have taken, or I've taken it back to 3 of the 4 houses, and they have indicated to me that they're taking it to their respective people to ask what their thoughts are. So they thanked us for the question and said they would get back to us on any thoughts they may have.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Any other business arising from the minutes, folks, before we move on? Okay, so we are now at our, well, do we have any student achievements or district presentations? It doesn't appear we do on our agenda tonight. We don't have any community presentations tonight, so that brings us to B, correspondence. So we're at B1. We have 3 pieces of correspondence on the agenda tonight. I wonder if anybody would like to discuss any of those pieces of correspondence. Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Here, first of all, I'll pull out the correspondence from the GVTA on February 7th regarding sanctuary schools policy. Just want to say thank you for that that letter, and I will be addressing that further on in the agenda under notice of motions. And then with B2, so February 8th from the Oak Bay Police Department. Regarding the SPLO, I just wondered if our subcommittee has met with any of our policing members of the surrounding municipalities, or if there are plans to do so.
I might, as chair of that committee, Trustee Kwan, I probably can give you a bit of background and context on that. So we have representatives from the police on the committee. And so there were 2 seats available on the committee for police representatives. And so the various policing bodies that are impacted by the SPLO programs or have involvement in them decided amongst themselves who would represent them. And so right at the moment, we have a member of the Victoria Police Department and also Saanich that are police representatives on that committee. So yeah, so I don't know if folks want to give me any direction around that particular letter. The chair of the Oak Bay Police Board is asking to meet to discuss SPLO programs in Oak Bay. So yeah, I don't know if the board wants to give me any direction on that or not. But they're welcome to. Trustee Kwan.
I mean, I'd be willing to move a motion for you to meet with the Oak Bay Police Chief, or I think it was the chief that requested it, yes?
The chair of their
okay.
yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and just in the interest, if I were to, support or give a little support to the motion, is that, it never hurts to have information from all sides and to listen to all sides. So, I just think it's important to lend our ear to everyone involved.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I don't know if we really need a motion, but you can certainly put one on the floor if you want, or I can take that as some direction and set up a time to meet. Okay, all right. What about the other correspondence? Does anybody want to pull anything else for discussion? Otherwise, it's there for your information. All right, so I'm going to move us forward then in our agenda that we are now at trustee reports, C1, which is my chair's report. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about that. No, all right, well, it's there for your information. Let me know if you do have any questions. And then there is also our board work plan for March that is also there for your information. And if there's any questions, then please let me know. We don't have any trustee reports this evening, and so that will move right into board committee reports. We're starting with D1. This is our Education Policy and Directions Committee reports, or recommended motions rather, but we start at A, which is the draft minutes, which are there for information only. The committee has recommended 2 motions for the board's consideration this evening. The first is that B, and that is that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria approve the international student fees for the 2023-2024 school year. So before we move into moving motions and the like, I just want to open the floor up to our stakeholders around the table to see whether or not they would like to comment on or have any things they would like to say in relation to that particular motion. Okay, all right, yeah, not seeing any hands, so I will move us then back to moving motions. So would anybody like to move that motion? Yep, thank you, Trustee Kwan. And a seconder? Thank you, Trustee Painter. All right, so let's have a discussion, folks. As the movers of the motion, Trustee Kwan, and as a seconder, Trustee Painter, you're certainly willing and welcome to motivate if you want. So Trustee Kwan, did you want to speak to it?
I think reasonably, we've tried to keep those fees as low as possible. I know there are a bit of increase in a couple of areas, but not what I see as hugely significant. And I know that we have tried to keep them down. So I would be in support of the motion.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Trustee Painter, did you want to add anything as the seconder? No. All right, fair enough. Anybody else have any comments, questions regarding the motion before I call a question? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. All right, so we have a second motion as well, recommended motion from Ed Policy this month, that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria direct the chair to write a letter to the Ministry of Education and Childcare advocating for the funding to allow teachers to plan, collaborate, and learn together, as well as provide the resources to deliver the new Indigenous grad requirements courses successfully. All right, Trustee Kwan, would you like to move it? Sure. And seconder? Thank you, Trustee Carmichael. All right, again, I just want to, before we get into discussions, I just want to allow our stakeholders an opportunity to speak to the motion on the floor if they wish. Yes, President Turcotte, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't really have anything to add. I just want to say on behalf of the teachers to thank you, the trustees, for this motion and to consider our request. a really important course, something that, you know, we believe in and want to do well, and we appreciate that, you know, that you're wanting to support that and looking for an action to help us achieve going forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, President Turcotte. Appreciate your comments. All right, trustees. Any discussion, questions? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll motivate. I was talking to a parent just last night whose child actually was taking the course this year, and has absolutely loved the course. A couple of guest speakers, and you know, has just gotten so much from this. I think it's such a great initiative. So thankful that this is being brought to our schools. But again, keeping in mind that if we want to bring in, you know, really great resources to teach these courses and guest speakers like we have, that we need those funds to do so. And I think it's important that the ministry understand that, and also understand about, you know, how much professional development and collaboration has gone into creating these courses without any funding for that professional development. So, you know, I think this is kind of what we need to remind the ministry, that we need that money to do that.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any other speakers to the motion on the floor? All right, hearing none, all those in favor? All right, folks, and that is unanimous. Thank you again, trustees. All right, so we're moving on to D2. This is our Operations Policy and Planning Committee. Again, at A in the agenda, we have our February 13th minutes for information only. And we have the first recommended motion at B. And this is that the Board of Education of School District number 61 Greater Victoria approve the posting of the following 2023-24 and 2024-25 school calendars on the school district's website for a period of 1 month. So just want to flag again that this is I believe the first time that we've done a 2 years, a calendar that covers 2 years, and that we are trying to align with our neighboring school districts. And again, this is just a period of consultation, which is required by the School Act. Again, before we move the motion, maybe we'll again just ask our stakeholders around the table if there's any comments that they have regarding the motion. Okay, hearing none. Who would like to move the motion? Thank you, Trustee Painter, and a seconder, Trustee Bayo. Thank you. Any discussion? And again, you're welcome to motivate, Trustee Painter. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. The one thing I just wanted to observe is just extend my appreciation to district staff for going to the work to align this calendar so closely with our neighboring school districts, you know, with the exception of, you know, perhaps 1 or 2 Pro D days that are tied to individual school assignment of Pro D Day. They are completely in alignment with the other districts, and I think it'll be a lot easier to look to programming or other such requirements for those days to cover off with childcare, et cetera.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Any other comments, contributions before we call the question? Yeah, Trustee Bayo, go ahead.
Kind of just agreeing with Trustee Painter, but since I teach in Saanich, I know that a lot of Saanich teachers would also appreciate this because they either live in Victoria or they teach in both districts, and the stress of having their kids in one district on spring break while they're not on spring break is something I hear about every single year in the teachers' lounge. So
thanks, Trustee Bayo. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Sorry, something unrelated. Trustee Gagnon is actually waiting to be let into the meeting.
I think he's here. Yeah, he's here. But thank you. All right. Yeah, and welcome to Trustee Gagnon. All right, so if there are no other comments regarding D2B, I will call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. And opposed? Abstentions? And that's all unanimous except for Trustee Gagnon, who understandably abstained as he just arrived. Fair enough. All right, so we're moving on. We have one more recommended motion coming out of Ops, and that is in relation to the quarterly financial report. So that the Board of Education accept the December 2022 quarterly financial report as presented to the Audit Committee. I just, before we move the motion, I wonder if there is anything the Secretary Treasurer would like to review with the board before I open it up for discussion.
No, I don't have anything to review. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And were there any comments or questions from our stakeholders? All right, hearing none, would someone like to move approval of the quarterly report? Thank you, Trustee Painter, seconded by Trustee Kwan. Any discussion, trustees? Yeah, Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Thank you to Katrina and Julie and their team for the report that they put together. Lots of really great background information on some of the line items. So well done, and it was easy to understand and get through.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. Any other comments or questions before I call us to a vote? All right, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. All right, thanks again, trustees. All right, so we're going to move into our D3, which is our Budget Advisory Committee, and various reports A through C, and I will turn it over to the Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. These reports, the two reports, the Representative Advisory Council of Students meeting and the Student Symposium report, are there for your information. And we've also provided the approved minutes from the last Budget Advisory Committee meeting.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. All right, folks, I'm just going to open it up to any questions or comments regarding the reports. Okay, all right. Thanks again, Secretary Treasurer. Appreciate you pulling that all together. It was certainly very interesting reading, in particular around the student feedback. It was very, very interesting. All right, so let's move us on. We are now at E1, which is our superintendent's report. Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Duncan. I'll just, for your information, share the monthly report for February. You can see the activities and meetings that I participated in. I do want to draw your attention to February 15th, where we had the Welcome to Kindergarten evening. We had approximately 550 parents and caregivers join us online for that evening, which was a wonderful way to welcome in new parents that are joining our district. And I think going to online has been more accessible to parents to be able to log in and participate. The meeting also occurs later in the evening so that parents of younger children can hopefully get them to bed before they join online. So again, some tweaks that we've made since COVID, and I think those have been positive. Also like to draw your attention to some congratulations. So as we talk about welcoming to K, we also talk about some of our students who are exiting as graduates. So we had 2 students who flew to Toronto to participate in some interviews with regards to the Loran Scholarship Foundation, both of whom are on the student representative group that meets monthly. So we have the opportunity to meet with them monthly and hear their thoughts, but we did wish them well as they headed off, and I think they returned either last night or today. So I did want to celebrate and congratulate those 2 students. And then lastly, just with gratitude to the Indigenous Education Department and Associate Superintendent Tom Arts, as well as Kelly Gorman for planning and registering for the Finesse meeting, which occurred with 4 districts. 5 districts on the 13th of February. Again, some wonderful opportunities to discuss the Indigenous grad requirements and where to from here, both inside our district and throughout the Lower Island. Also, facilities department for their work. Unfortunately, that we had to do a lot of cleanup at Cedar Hill. Fortunate that we have such a fantastic facilities group that was in over the weekend, many hours cleaning up that mess and having it all ready for students to return on the Monday. And then lastly, to Pathways and Partnerships teams, which we know supports kindergarten through grade 12 students. They did host a Guess My Job event at Frank Hobbs, and we made our way over there, and it was a lot of fun to watch students in grade 5 talk about their jobs and to hear the vast array of jobs they're thinking of doing. So we heard contortionist, we heard like marine biologist, we heard some fantastic jobs that I think that traditionally we wouldn't have heard in the past. So it was really great. And I know that they got to guess the jobs of the individuals that walked out and then got to hear about their job and speak with them further. So again, many thanks for Bonnie for hosting that, and also to Frank Hobbs for having their students participate. That is my report for the month of February.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. Yeah, some fantastic things to highlight, some great things going on across the district. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to open the floor up if folks have any questions for the superintendent before we move to receive her report for the month. Not seeing any questions, so may I have a mover to receive the superintendent's report? Thank you, Trustee Painter, and a seconder, Trustee Gagnon. Thank you very much. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thanks again. We're now on trustee questions at E1B. Do we have any questions, trustees, this month? Not seeing any hands, but please correct me if I've missed anybody. Otherwise, I'll move us along to E2, which is our Secretary Treasurer's report, and I'll turn the floor over to the Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Included the monthly report there since the last board meeting. It's the list of all of the meetings and activities that I've participated in, and it's there for your information, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Trustees, just opening the floor up now for any questions or comments that you might have regarding the Secretary Treasurer's report. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, but again, correct me if I've missed anybody. And would someone like to move to receive the Secretary Treasurer's report? Thank you, Trustee Bayo, seconded by Trustee Kwan. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. All right, so it's moving right into E2B, which is our amended annual budget. So this item, I want to turn things over to the Secretary Treasurer, who will walk us through the amended budget.
I'm just going to try sharing my screen and using this microphone and see what happens.
Sounds good, thank you.
There we go. Okay, I think this is working. So they'll be presenting the 2022-2023 sorry, amended annual budget this evening. Before I get started, I definitely need to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of Julie Lutner, our Associate Secretary Treasurer, who has been working tirelessly for the past few months to finalize the amended annual budget for you this evening. If you want to refer to your agenda package, it does start on page 85, but I do have the presentation, which will provide some highlights. So you could probably just follow along with that. And you are welcome to ask questions throughout. I can only see 3 other people. So if you have questions, maybe either hit the raise hand or just jump in with your questions, and we'll pause and just work our way through the slides. So we always want to keep in mind that resources and budget allocation should be centered on the student learning experience. So we're always looking to the strategic plan, the board work plan, the framework for enhancing student learning, any district operational plans, school growth plans, in order to align our resources to support student success. So in April 2022, the board approved the 2022-2023 annual budget, which we sometimes call the preliminary budget. The budget bylaw for that budget was $268 million, and it was based on estimated revenues and expenses. The Ministry of Education and Childcare requires boards to approve an amended annual budget by February 28th. So our amended annual budget bylaw is $289 million, and it's based on revenue and expenses that are tied to actual enrollment at September 29th. Any new revenue and expenses that have been confirmed after the preliminary budget was approved in April, and any expenses that are related to unspent budgets from the prior year that we plan to spend in the current year. And public sector accounting standards require that our budget includes the operating fund, the special purpose fund, and the capital fund. So this slide here just refers to the various schedules and statements that are included in the ministry budget document that's in the agenda package. These are some of the highlights, but we will be going through in detail some of the revenue and expenses. So enrollment has increased by 127.70 FTE. So our operating grant is higher. And this is due to the higher enrollment. There's also variable operating expenses that are tied to that, such as staffing and supplies, that will also be higher. International education, their enrollment is down slightly from the preliminary budget, down 34 FTE in the regular program and 14 students in the short-term program. Investment income has increased by 1 million, and that's because interest rates, when we were building the annual budget, were quite a bit lower than they are now. There's labor settlement funding that we've received in the amount of 7.9 million. This is from the Ministry of Education, and there was also 756,000 received in the Classroom Education Fund, CEF. So this is funding that covers the wage and collective agreement increases. And then we also have some new sources of funding that we have added to the budget since April. So I'm sure you've heard of the Student and Family Affordability Fund. There are also CEF remedies, so they don't get added to the budget until after September 30th. And then also some federal safe return to class funds for ventilation. This is an overview of the operating fund. So it's a comparison between the annual budget and the amended annual budget. And we will look at revenue and expenses in details, but what this table shows is that our revenue increased by 11.5 million and our expenses increased by 13.3 million, giving us a net expense increase of 1.8 million. So that net expense increase is related to the spending of prior year surplus budget because there's no revenue to offset those expenses. There are no planned interfund transfers. They were budgeted to be spent from local capital. Here we have our projected accumulated surplus. So our projected accumulated surplus at the end of 22-23 is down by 4.1 million compared to the prior year. So if we look at the increase decrease column under project budgets, it's down by 0.6 million. And that's related to projects that were carried forward from 2021-2022 that will be spent in the current year. So examples are the Vic West Portable, there were some shop upgrades, and also a wall at Quadra Elementary. School level funds are down by 0.4 million, and this is based on an estimate. So this represents the unspent budget in schools. Our reserve policy currently says that elementary and middle schools can carry forward $40,000 at the end of the year, and secondaries can carry forward $80,000. So in coming up with this $1 million balance, we looked at the balances that are currently in those accounts and projected spending to the end of the year. Purchase order commitments. The estimate for this year is slightly lower than last year. Looked at the historical amounts over the past 4 years and made our best estimate. Last year was a little bit higher because we had some electric buses that were in there for 0.2 million. And there were also some delays that we were seeing in receiving technology. So purchase orders went in quite early, but the goods weren't received by the end of June. And planned surplus to balance budget. So in 21-22, we had $2.3 million of surplus that we used to balance the budget in 22-23. All of that will be spent by the end of 22-23. And we're not anticipating any surplus in 22-23 to balance the 23-24 budget. And there will be more information on that in the next slide. Unrestricted operating surplus contingency remains unchanged. It's being held at 1.2 million. And unrestricted international surplus contingency, this was an amount that was carried forward as a surplus from international education. And it's not there projected by the end of this year due to the lower enrollment. It needed to be used in order to balance the budget in the current year. So if you look just below the table, you can see the total prior year operating revenues, and then the calculation of the percentage of our unrestricted surplus as a percentage of the prior year operating revenue. So projected for 22-23 with the 1.2 million in contingency, we're at 0.54% compared to 0.73 in the prior year. So this slide helps to explain why we're anticipating not having a surplus at the end of the current fiscal year. So we did actually receive quite a bit of revenue, 2.6 million in ministry operating grant due to increased enrollment, as well as interest income of $1 million. However, there were also some expense adjustments that had to be made in the final budget. So tied to that 2.6 million ministry operating grant, there are direct costs that are related. So that's the staffing and supplies that I mentioned, 1.8 million. Our TTOC costs are $2.6 million higher than what we had budgeted. Those are costs related to sick leaves and maternity leaves. Fortunately, we had a little bit of teacher savings and hiring lag of 1.7 million to help offset that. And we also saw some savings and hiring lag in EAs of 0.6 million. Here you'll see the custodial services addition. So that's the 0.2 million for up to 10 custodians to be hired by the end of June. And as a result of international education enrollment being down, their gross profit that they provide to the district is also reduced. So that's 0.3 million. And then we have 0.9 million of just smaller adjustments that are included. So legal services increase, utilities, insurance, crossing guards, and joint job evaluation committee increases. So our district has a policy 3170, called operating surplus. And it's based on ministry policy that directs boards to hold reasonable unrestricted operating surplus. And the reason for that is to mitigate risk for emergencies or unexpected changes in revenue and expenses. It would allow the district to maintain regular operations under those conditions. So based on our policy, the ideal is between 2 and 4% of the prior year's operating revenue. And as we saw on the previous slide, we're currently at 0.54% with a balance of 1.2 million. Moving on to operating fund revenue. So this is just looking at operating revenue. You can find this on Schedule 2 and 2A, which is on page 100 and 101 in the agenda package. And I'm just going to highlight the larger variances. So our operating grant from the Ministry of Education and Childcare is up by 2.5 million. And that's a result of our overall school age enrollment increasing by 127.7 FTE. So that's 1 million of that 2.5 million. We also received more funding for unique student needs of 1.8 million. And that is English language learners, so 0.4 million, and also inclusive education at 1.4 million. We receive a supplement for salary differential. So if your average teacher salary is higher than the provincial average, you receive funding from the ministry for that. Ours is actually lower than the provincial average. So our funding went down by 0.3 million. Other Ministry of Education grants are up by 7.9 million, and that's directly related to the labor settlement funding. So the breakdown of the 7.9, if you're curious, is teachers at 4.7 million, excluded, exempt at 0.9, and support staff at 2.3. Provincial grants, other. This is related to the After School Sport and Art Initiative grant that we received from the Ministry of Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport. And tuition is down by about 1 million. This is related to the decrease in international tuition. Again, referring to the 34 FTE that were down in regular. So we had hoped for 925 students and ended up with 891. And then short term, we're down by 14 students. Other revenues are up by 0.8 million. So these are miscellaneous revenues. They can be donations or other grants. We see vendor rebates, and even if we have scrap metal that we put in for sale. So the increase in the current year is related to the 0.2 million donation that we received to support elementary strings, the 0.2 million that we received for crossing guard funding, and we also received 0.4 million from the GVTA. So it was their unspent 1920 remedy that they gave back to the district to support teacher staffing. And as noted earlier, investment income is up by 1 million. So our interest rates have increased significantly in the past year. So when we built the budget in April, the interest rate on the central deposit program, where we hold the majority of our funds, was at 0.95%, and it's currently at 5.2%. Operating fund expenses, starting with salaries and benefits. So this one you can find Schedule 2B, which is on page 102 of your agenda package. And I'm just going to highlight again the higher variances. So teachers are up by 2.9 million. This is increase is due to $427 added to each step of the salary grid, plus 3.24% general wage increase. It's just partially offset by a decrease in the 22-23 budgeted average teacher salary. Principals and vice principals are up by 0.7 million, and that's related to step increments. Also, the regional salary model increased, but those increases received were capped at 5% for the 2022 calendar year. EAs are up 1.4 million. This is due to increased inclusive learning enrollment. There was also a 25-cent per hour wage increase plus 3.24% general wage increase. And then also in there are the increased hours for the crossing guard services, less an adjustment to account for unfilled vacancies. Support staff is up by 1.6 million. Also 25-cent per hour wage increase plus 3.24% general wage increase. And in local bargaining, there was an increase in allowances and shift differentials. We added the 0.2 million increase for custodial services. And then the joint job evaluation increase for school administrative assistant 3s is 0.1 million. Other professional is up by 0.5 million. So this is made up of exempt and trustees. For the exempt, there were some step increments. Also, the salary grid increased, but similar to principals and vice principals, increases were capped at 5% for the 2022 calendar year. Trustees saw an increase of 7% effective January 1st, 2023. And then there were also some one-time labor relation costs. Substitutes are up by 2.5 million. And that's due to the increase in the average number of daily absences per teacher. But also they received the $427 added to each step of the salary grid plus the 3.24% general wage increase. And benefits are up 2.2 million. So anytime the salaries increase, there's wage sensitive benefits that increase along with it. So moving on to services and supplies. Services are up by points. The rest is due to reallocation of department and school budgets to reflect spending. And the addition of carry forward budget for both schools and departments. Professional development and travel is up by 0.1. We can tie that to some travel that the Indigenous Education Program did to New Zealand, a summer literacy institute for teachers hosted by the district team, and also an increase in CUPE 947 Pro-D from local bargaining. Insurance is up by 0.05 million, and that's simply an increase in our annual premium from the school protection program. Supplies are up by 0.5 million, directly related to the carry forward budgets for schools and departments. And lastly, utilities are up by 0.1 million, and that is as a result of a 20% increase in the carbon tax effective January 1, 2023. So as I mentioned, we also budget for special purpose funds. You can find those in Schedule 3 and 3A on pages 105 and 106 in the agenda package. And these are separate funds that are set up to track revenue and expenses for money that's received either from the ministry or external parties. And they have restrictions on how they can be used. We don't allow any transfers at all from operating or capital into special purpose funds. And I've just highlighted 3 of the larger funds, and that's the school generated funds, Community Link, and the Classroom Enhancement Fund. So this table here just shows a comparison of revenue between the annual and amended annual budget. So the revenue amount that's in there is what we plan to spend to the end of the year. And if there's any revenue that's unspent, it will be deferred to the next year. We'll just highlight the larger variances within this table. So school generated funds is up by 0.2 million. School generated funds are funds that are collected at the school level from parents, PACs, community for things like field trips, activities, lunch programs, fundraising. And the reason this one increased is due to the interest revenue. So we allocate interest revenue on balances that are held in that account. So the balances have gone up due to the interest rate increase. OLEP, which is the federal French, is up by 0.07 million, and that's a result of a new growth initiative and retention grant. Community Link is up by 0.8 million, and this is ministry funding to support vulnerable students through the allocation of food, school-based counselors, teachers, EAs, and YFCs. And the reason why it's higher is there was a higher than expected surplus at the end of last year. So the budget in the current year is higher because of that carry forward. CEF, or Classroom Enhancement Fund, is up by 2.5 million. This is the ministry funding that we received to offset the costs related to implementation of restored GVTA collective agreement language as it relates to class size and composition. So the ministry provides only a portion of expected staffing of the staffing grant until funding is confirmed after September 30th. And the remedies grant, as mentioned, is not confirmed until after September 30th. Also, the 0.8 million in labor settlement funding was received for the CEF fund. So overall, the CEF fund has increased by 3.3 million. There are a few funds in there, like the First Nations student transportation, mental health in schools, changing results for young children, and the SEY2KT, early years to K. So these are new, or so any new and unspent funding from the prior year are confirmed after the preparation of our preliminary budget. And as mentioned, there's the federal safe return to class ventilation funds that are in there for $1 million. And that's the carry forward of unspent and new ventilation funding from last year, all of it which will be spent on ventilation in the current year. And early childhood educator dual credit program, 1.1 million. This is a partnership with Camosun and SD62, 63, and 64, and it's to develop and administer ECE dual credit program. And these funds were received after the preliminary budget was prepared. The Student and Family Affordability Fund, as mentioned, we received 1.9 million. We're expecting to spend 1.7 and defer 0.2 million. And this was the funding that was provided by the ministry to support students and families with improved access to nutritional food, meals, and directly offset costs for school supplies, education-related fees, and clothing, footwear for school sports and other school activities. And lastly, the ELC Early Care and Learning 0.2 million, and that was a ministry grant to explore the expansion of childcare on school grounds. And now onto the capital fund. You can find this schedule 4 on page 109. And the capital fund has expenditures related to land, building, computer hardware, software, vehicles, furniture, and equipment. And the funding for these comes from provincial grants, local capital, but also transfers from operating and special purpose funds. Two of the changes from the annual budget was the other revenue is down by 4.3 million from the Caledonia project because it was received in 21-22 and not 22-23. And we're also showing potential proceeds on a sale of land at Lansdowne North to the CSF, which is just 25% of total proceeds at 3.8 million. And statement 4 is on page 98. So this is the projected acquisition of tangible capital assets from all funds. It's 43.9 million. So they're coming from special purpose fund at 1.2 million, school generated funds, which is looking like playgrounds and computer technology so far, and the ventilation funds of $1 million. Local capital, we're seeing our 2.6 million contribution that we had to make for Vic High, a shoreline classroom, Sundance Bank as it adds new divisions, network and technology infrastructure, and then up to 0.9 million in other operating capital purchases from schools and departments. And then deferred capital revenue is at 38.4. This is the Vic High seismic project, Cedar Hill seismic, a playground at Macaulay, various other ministry approved projects for electric buses and childcare spaces. Which brings us to our amended annual budget bylaw. So the budget is approved with a bylaw which requires 3 readings, and it requires agreement by the board to give 3 readings of the bylaw in one meeting. So this is set up so that the 3 readings could be done in this one meeting. And I think I'll pass it over unless there are any questions that you have.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. I wonder if we might just move out of screen sharing just so it's a little bit easier to see the questions, and then we can move back into the slide deck as we need to. Okay, folks, so let's move into questions. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
First of all, just looking at the order of the motions for the bylaws, I'm wondering if we can move the motion to approve all 3 in one sitting to after the second reading. I think, once we've got questions answered, does that sound like a better order to do things in? I kind of relying on the trustees who have been around the table longer than I have.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. So what we'll do is we'll start with just going through our questions and having a discussion around the budget, and then we'll move into one reading at a time. And so we'll do the first reading, the second reading, and then I'll ask for the permission of the Assembly to do a third reading. And as the Secretary Treasurer indicated, that third reading the permission to do a third reading tonight. The vote needs to be unanimous in order for us to move forward with a third reading tonight. But just to highlight the fact that we're working to a deadline in terms of this does need to be turned around by tomorrow technically, because that's when the revised budget is due to the ministry. So with that in mind, let's start with our discussion. And Trustee Kwan, did you want to kick us off?
I guess my first question would be, and actually maybe two that are related. I noticed that the labor settlement that we received was 7.89 million. I think you mentioned that earlier on in your memo, but the increase to salaries is 9.67 million. And so that, that equals about a 1.78 million difference. And I just wondered kind of where that comes in. Is that due to some positions that just aren't funded by that labor settlement? Or is it that we just weren't fully funded by that labor settlement?
Answer right. I can try. Oh. I can try to answer that, and then Julie can jump in. Some of the increases are not tied to wage increases, so they may be like step increments. So teachers move along increments, as do principals and vice principals. So there are increases to wages that wouldn't be funded with the labor settlement funding.
Sorry, and then if I may, through the chair, for a follow-up or related question.
Absolutely. Sorry, Trustee Kwan, it was hard to hear you. Would you mind? I'm not sure if you can adjust your microphone. Oh, I think that's
better. I'm just leaning back in my chair. Okay. Okay. And so, yeah, I'm just wondering then, as far as TTOC salaries go, is that kind of included in that labor settlement funding? And if so, like how does that work? I know that the ministry doesn't overshare with their formulas, but I wondered if you had any insight into, how, if it relates to that labor settlement funding, and if so, how?
Feel free, whoever can respond to respond, whether that's Julie. Yeah, go ahead, Julie. Sorry, I didn't see you there for a second. Hi, Julie. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Through the chair. So the TTOC salary increases were a result of the average number of TTOC days each teacher took. So when I was doing the labor settlement funding calculation, it was based on, I had done all the amended budget adjustments, and then I added on the labor settlement fund costs. And in regards to your prior question about the funding, I was surprised at how close all the labor settlement funding calculations came in. So yeah, there was no significant variances that I could see when I was adding in the budgets for labor settlement funding.
Thank you, Julie. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to pull up my page here. Was there not mention of like their salary differential actually decreased, which would suggest that the average teacher's salary, and I'm assuming it's based on teacher salary, was relatively lower than it would be in other districts? Is that, have I got that right so far?
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Sorry, I'm not good with my hand through the chair. So the oh my goodness, I just drew
salary differential or
salary differential. So our salary differential grant is based on our average teacher salary relative to the province.
Right.
So ours, we're still receiving funding for it, so it's still higher than the average. However, we are lower relative to the average than the prior year, and you can tell that when I made a budget adjustment to teacher salary, I did reduce the teacher salary function or line item to reflect the reduced average teacher cost.
Okay, okay,
So
I
our
get it now. Yeah,
grant went down and I reduced the expenses as well.
okay.
Right, Trustee Painter, did you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right, and I was remiss. I should have, before trustees started asking questions, I should have actually offered our stakeholders an opportunity to ask questions as well. We have not missed that opportunity. We don't have a motion on the floor. We're not debating. We are just in the query section of our agenda item. So I do note that President Humphreys of BC PAC had some questions. So please feel free, President Humphreys, to take the floor.
Thanks, Chair. I appreciate that. I'm still not quite clear on all the protocols and where I'm allowed to ask questions and where I'm not. So that's why I just kind of popped off an email, but I can quickly, and I'm so glad I wrote them down because I would have forgotten. So I just had 3 little questions and you may have covered them, Secretary Treasurer, and I apologize if you did. It was a lot. Really good, clear information for the most part. So I noticed that district admin increased by 727,000, and I might have missed the explanation on that. That was on page 6 of Schedule 2.
Secretary Treasurer or Julie, if anybody could provide a response around that, that would be great.
Julie?
So I could speak to that. So they were mainly a result of labor settlement funding costs, so increased salaries.
Okay.
And then obviously the corresponding benefit increases for that, as well as an increase in legal fees and insurance premiums. And then there were some one-time labor relations costs in there as well.
Okay, yeah, so it was kind of covered, but not connected in my mind. So thank you, appreciate it. I know there's always a reason. I just like to understand it. So the other question I had was there was a line, and I feel like I looked it up, but services where there was an increase of 614,000. And it was noted it was a reallocation, but I wasn't sure where from and whether it even matters. I'm just curious about that and what services would refer to. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Do you want to just pause there and we'll just pause there and then I'll see if staff have anything they could add around that as well.
There's no, it's not a pressure. I'm just curious. And then the last one was probably the most important one to me, which is that, you noted, and I've heard it mentioned a few times that there were unfilled vacancies for EAs, and so that those funds were taken out of the adjusted budget, right? And I just didn't hear the amount. So I'm curious how much that was.
Thanks very much. All right, Julie, I know you can at least provide some insight into the second question. So go ahead when you're ready.
Okay, so with respect to the question about services, part of the increase in services is due to increase in legal expenses. And then for the budget, sometimes we just put all the supplies in supplies, not knowing how departments and schools are going to actually spend those funds. So during the fall, schools and departments will then reallocate their budget to plan spending. We had looked through in the last quarterly to see if there was any big significant variances, and neither Katrina nor I saw any that really jumped out to us. Services could be things such as contracts through inclusive learning. International education has a lot of contracts for their programming. So those are, and then of course, there's so in facilities, they have some contracts in there for the fleet. So those are the bigger items that are included in services. As far as the unfilled EA vacancies, so in the preliminary budget, I had built in through the budget deliberation savings, projected savings of 0.6, so 600,000 roughly. And then in addition, through looking at our projection, EA is really hard to project because it depends on how many vacancies there are, how many unfilled of those postings, how many are going to be filled, the timing. Between that and some other school assistant line items, I had projected a further 600,000. So it's kind of muddled with the additional EA savings.
Thanks
So,
very much. Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. You had a follow-up?
I just was like, so is that, does that sound like 1.2 or is it 600? Okay, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the explanations.
Great. Thanks so much for your questions. And again, just want to pause for a second and just again provide stakeholders an opportunity to ask any other questions they might have before I turn things back over to trustees. Okay. All right. So trustees, any other questions regarding the revised budget? Yes, go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around Schedule 1, which is, of course, accumulated surplus deficit. And I think I have it, but I just want to make sure that my thinking is correct. At first, I was thinking it didn't make sense to me why the operating fund, basically what we were taking from the operating fund surplus was increasing if we were making funds in special purpose and capital fund, but we're not doing an inter-fund transfer from there. So I think in this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that the special purpose fund and the capital fund, where we have an actual net revenue, they're actually mitigating that loss of surplus. Is that correct? Not sure if I'm reading this correctly or not.
Yeah, thanks, Trustee Kwan. And again, to whoever is in a position to add any insights, whether that be the Secretary Treasurer or Associate Secretary Treasurer. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Thanks. So if I don't answer your question, just let me know. So the special purpose fund, all revenues that aren't spent are deferred. So usually you should see your revenues equal your expenses, with the exception of capital assets. So those have to be transferred to the capital fund in order to be amortized. So all capital asset purchases are moved there. You don't see a line item for the operating fund capital purchases because we in the preliminary budget, the board approved for all operating purchases to be purchased out of local capital. So even though they're purchased with operating fund, at year end, I'll just do a journal entry to move them all out and into local capital. So it's not really a transfer. It's just, they're going to be, it's like they've always been out of there. And then capital fund, the net revenue includes things like deferred amortization of deferred capital revenue. So if we receive revenue from the ministry, we have to amortize it over the life of the asset, and the offsetting expense would be the amortization of the expense side. So they're usually pretty close. Amortization is usually higher because, of course, we have things we don't receive revenue for, like operating purchases. And then again, then you see the tangible capital assets from the special purpose fund being moved into capital fund so that they can be amortized. Does that help? Sir?
I was just trying to wrap my head around, why the budget allocation or retirement of surplus was higher in the amended budget than it was in the original budget. And the original budget had the 2.3, which I'm assuming was all from operating. But I'm curious why the retirement of surplus went up, and didn't keep the budgeted surplus or deficit for the year the same. But I guess what it does is I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. I think that this is special purpose capital and operating all rolled into one. So I think if I were to have a breakdown, it would probably make sense to me. I think it's having it all in one in statement 2, and then looking at schedule 1 and having them kind of broken apart is the disconnect there. But yeah, so go ahead.
I just noticed that Julie might have some further information to offer. So go ahead, Julie.
So if you look at the capital fund, schedule 4 might help you. So the net revenue expense for the year in the preliminary budget was 1.9 million, and then it's now 1.5 million. So part of that was in the annual budget. We, the whole Caledonia agreement, we had thought that it wouldn't be finalized until after June 30th, but actually it was finalized before year end. So that was a huge change to the budget. But then, yeah, so that's one item. So you can see under net revenue expense, there's the 1.583, which ties into the 1.583 on schedule 1. Do you see that on the under fund balance?
Right, you're talking about schedule 4, which is page 109, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So if you look under, so there's invested intangible capital assets and then local capital, and the two of those combined equal the fund balance. Okay. So you can see the fund balance has revenues and expenses, and then the net revenue expense. So the third column over, fund balance, is 1.583, which then ties into the capital fund on schedule 1. And then that gives you a better breakdown of what the revenue and expense items included in that are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and thank you to Julie. Trustee Painter, I believe you had a question as well.
Yes, I might be off base here, but I would just, and the last bit of the conversation started to help clarify this. So this has nothing to do with restricted capital. That's something else entirely. Do we have, just not looking for an exact number, but do we have a balance in restricted capital this time?
Julie, were you able to answer that question?
Yeah, I could get that in just a second, unless Katrina knows it off the top of her head.
Yeah, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
$3 million.
All right, great. Thanks, Julie. That was quick. Literally at your fingertips. Wonderful. Thanks again. All right, so is that starting to make sense for folks in terms of the various capital budgets and how it kind of all works together? Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Kwan.
One last question that's kind of a little bit off topic from the last one was just the Classroom Enhancement Fund. And I believe you said that was new this year. No, it's not a new one. It's one that's been going on. Okay. And so I guess the connection I'm trying to make is with the budget advisory committees and some of the budgets we saw when we were going through that. And I noticed that I believe the inclusive learning team, school-based inclusive learning team and district program staffing has 14.3 teachers paid from the Classroom Enhancement Fund. And is that all of the Classroom Enhancement Fund, or is that just some of it?
Yeah, again, go ahead, Julie. Yeah.
That's just some of it. So the Classroom Enhancement Fund pays for some teacher librarians, counseling, inclusive learning staffing. It pays for Section D 2.9 of the collective agreement, which is low incidence prep. It includes some classroom teacher staffing, some additional exploratory time at middle school, some band, and then remedies. And the reason remedies weren't included in the prelim budget because we're not allowed to include any ministry grants that haven't yet been announced. So they didn't announce the remedies grant until they're confirmed in the fall. So that was a huge chunk. Yeah. So there's over 100 teacher FTE included in Classroom Enhancement Fund.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the revised budget? So can I just have one question clarified? So in local capital, what is our current estimate of what will be left in local capital at the end of the financial year? Yeah, go ahead, Julie. Yeah.
So currently, I'm just pulling up the, currently we are expecting the sale of CSF to go through local capital, in which case the balance would then in local capital at year end sorry, I just need to find the amount. The balance in local capital, we would have a surplus of 588,000 plus 3.5 million, I believe. But if it doesn't go through, then we wouldn't have those funds. Yeah, I think I did so it depends what about the timing of the sale. So we would have a deficit in local capital of 3.2 million, offset by the 3.4 currently in local capital. That being said, that's just our projected spending. We also have other commitments coming out of local capital. So yeah, if we would have to look again at the spending and what we've committed to come out of local capital.
Okay, so without the proceeds of any land sale, we're looking at about 200,000 left in local capital by year end. And then we'll have to sort of see where we are with that.
Yeah, that's based on our current projected spend. So if we less, yeah.
Okay, and then the only other thing I wanted to just raise tonight around the revised budget is I'm wondering whether in light of kind of where we're at and what we're predicting, or what it looks like we're going to be predicting moving forward into the next financial, whether really the board should be considering any spending freezes sooner rather than later in areas where there's discretionary budgets involved. Like, so for instance, travel would be an obvious budget to potentially look at. I know we've got 5 months until the end of the financial year, so there's a small window of opportunity to tighten our belts, so to speak, and to look at potential savings. And I'm wondering whether Secretary Treasurer or superintendent could speak to whether you have any thoughts at this point or about what you might be recommending to the board.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, we are going to be having conversations with departments and principals and vice principals. So I think we would need to have those conversations first before having a recommendation to the board, as we are not aware of costs that they already have planned to incur. So I think we just need this week and a bit of next week to come forward with conversations before recommendations.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Okay, so we'll stay tuned. Appreciate that you're in the middle of those discussions. Okay, folks, I wonder if there's any other questions, anything else that folks want to review or discuss before we look at our first reading of the revised budget. Okay. So I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm going to assume that that means we are ready to move to our first reading. So would anyone like to move as school district number 61, Greater Victoria, sorry, 2022-23 amended annual budget bylaw in the amount of $289,487 be read a first time on this 27th day of February 2023. Trustee Kwan, thank you. And do I have a seconder? Trustee Gagnon. And would Trustee Kwan like to motivate?
I don't have too much to say, just thanks to the staff for putting everything together and answering our questions so diligently. And, you know, I think my questions have been answered to my satisfaction. So I'm happy to move forward with this.
And Trustee Gagnon is the seconder. You also may motivate if you like.
Thank you, Chair. I echo the sentiments of Trustee Kwan, just acknowledging the mountain of effort that it takes to put a budget out there and then go back through it with a fine-tooth comb to amend every single line item is daunting, to say the least, to me. I don't see anything in here that we have any power to really fix at this point. So I don't see why we shouldn't be able to adopt it tonight.
All right, thank you very much. Any discussion, trustees? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands? And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. All right, so who would like to move a second reading? Thank you, Trustee Bayo and Trustee Gagnon. You're our seconder again. All right. Any discussion? No. All right. Hearing none, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of a second reading? And that is unanimous. All right, folks. Okay, so now we're moving into the approval for a third reading. So again, in order to do all three readings of the bylaw this evening, we do need a unanimous, the unanimous consent of the board. And so I wonder if somebody would like to move a motion to agree to give all three readings of the 2022-23 amended annual budget this evening. Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and a seconder, Trustee Gagnon. Okay. Any discussion? All right. I don't hear any, so I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of all three readings this evening? And that is unanimous. All right, thanks, folks. All right, so let's move us right into our third reading. Unless there's any other further questions or comments, can I have a mover to have the third reading this evening? So we'll be reading it for a third time and adopting the revised budget. Who would like to move that motion? you, trustee Gagnon, and a seconder. Trustee Mabobi, thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor with a show of hands. All right, thanks, folks. That is unanimous. Appreciate it. And I know staff will appreciate it, so you can do the work overnight of getting this all done and dusted. All right, so we're moving on to, let's see, we've got F, question period. So I understand we do have some questions. I wonder if our communications manager, Lisa McPhail, could assist us.
Absolutely. So I will start with the most recent questions that came into the inbox. We have several, and in some emails, they have about 7 to 10 questions. So I'm just going to read them one by one.
Okay.
So it's super clear. So the first email that came in, it says, I had a look at the budget materials online, and I think the district has a $4 million deficit next year. And tonight I'm now hearing the new revised budget has 10 custodians in it. How can the board afford to add back when facing a deficit next year?
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so is there any, well, I'm going to turn the question over to the Secretary Treasurer Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair. That 200,000 that's been added is added just into the 2022-2023 budget. And then the remainder of the motion that came from is for a committee to review what custodial service plan should look like for next year and make recommendations to the board. So that decision was to add the 10 custodians was independent of the 2023-2024 year, although tied to another motion that would review what makes sense for custodial services for next year.
Thank you very much. All right, Lisa, what's our next question tonight?
Our next question is, what is the impact of hiring delays on student learning? When my child didn't have a permanent teacher to start the year, it was awful.
Thanks very much. I don't know, Superintendent, if you're able to provide some insight into that particular question.
Would it be possible to get that repeated, please?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I will read it again. What is the impact of hiring delays on student learning? When my child didn't have a permanent teacher to start the year, it was awful for her.
So I think with regards to impact on student learning, I think that is something we would avoid or hope to avoid at all costs. Sometimes we're not able to plan and know that leaves are coming up or that illnesses are coming up. So when we do have vacancies, we try to fill them as quickly as possible. And a lot of staffing occurs in the spring so that September is set up as best as we can. But we do recognize that not every situation is perfect and that we do have, unfortunately, some time delays between having continuing teachers in positions.
Thank you, Superintendent. All right, Lisa, what is our next question?
It's another custodian question, which I believe the Secretary Treasurer answered, but in full transparency, I will just read it again. Why is the board adding custodial time this year when you're facing a $4 million budget deficit? Is the plan to reinstate daytime custodians next year too? And if so, what will you cut?
Yeah, I think the Secretary Treasurer answered that question very well. Yeah, thanks so much.
Next question, how do exempt staff pay increases get improved? I haven't seen them come to the board, but also there's very little discussion by this board, so I may have missed it.
Yeah, I don't know if the Secretary Treasurer can provide some insight into salary increases. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. All of the increases for exempt and excluded staff are governed per se by BCPC, so BC Public Sector Employers Association. And so they provide direction from a public sector employer council as to what is acceptable on a calendar year basis. We do work on that usually twice a year. And any conversations around exempt and excluded compensation would not come to a public board meeting. It would be presented to the board in an in-camera meeting as it relates to salaries of individuals that can be identifiable.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer. Go ahead, Lisa. What's our next question?
Perfect, thank you. When will the board implement a trustee attendance record as per Trustee McNally's motion carried by the last board? I noticed some trustees rarely attend.
I'm not familiar with a motion, an outstanding motion from Trustee McNally. Maybe staff can enlighten me.
I think that question we'd have to take away and come back to.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so the next question. Let me just pull up this email. How much will a by-election cost and when/how will it be budgeted for? Will it be more or less than the costs incurred by Trustee McNally and Painter's litigation costs?
Yeah, again, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't have any pending by-election. And the costs of by-elections in general, I don't know if we have any information around by-election costs that we can provide the individual that's asking the question, but we don't have any pending by-election.
Next question is, what is the status of the music review?
Superintendent, I think you're probably best placed to answer that, or maybe Deputy Superintendent.
So the music review was provided in January, and it has that part has finished. We are moving forward with providing options to the Budget Advisory Committee on Thursday of this week.
Thanks very much. Go ahead, Lisa. What's next?
Okay, and our final question is, what is the process to file complaint of misconduct by a school trustee board member? Regulation 1155 is not clear whether this applies to board members as well as educational staff.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I can offer that trustees' duties and responsibilities are set out in the School Act first and foremost. And then we also have policy 8251, which pertains to the trustee code of conduct. And that sets out standards of conduct that we expect from board members. And 1155, I believe, applies to employees and to concerns in relation to decisions taken by employees. But again, I don't know if there's anything else that staff might want to add around that. If I've missed anything that might be relevant. Superintendent, was there anything else that you would want to add in response to that question?
No, nothing further for me. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Lisa. And I just want to note that we did have an additional question this evening that I have ruled out of order, and it won't be read into the record this evening. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks very much, Lisa, for your assistance in walking us through the questions from the public. So we're moving on to G, public disclosure of in-camera items. We have 3 reports around our in-camera meetings, which are at G1, G2, and G3. And do we have any questions arising from those reports, trustees, or shall I move us on to new business and notice of motions? All right. So moving on then to H1, which is new business. We don't have any new business this evening on our agenda. I understand we do have a notice of motions at H2, so I will turn the floor over to Trustee Kwan. Go ahead.
I actually have 3 motions that I would like to submit for notice tonight. I can read them out first, and then I can email them or put them in the chat, whatever's easiest for everyone. What I might do is I'll read them out and then put them in the chat, and then also email them. So everyone has them, and then that way you don't have to, Secretary Treasurer doesn't have to try to copy them from the chat, and she'll have them directly. The first one, that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the policy subcommittee to research and explore sanctuary school policies implemented by other school districts in BC and provide recommendations to the board through the Education Policy and Directions Committee about implementing a sanctuary school policy in school district number 61, Greater Victoria, by the May 2023 meeting. The second one, that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the policy subcommittee to examine and review the process and guidelines in place for program accreditation and evaluation relating to provisions made in policy and regulation 6162.8 and provide recommendations to the board through the Education Policy and Directions Committee for any necessary additions or changes. And number 3, that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the policy subcommittee to examine and review the process and guidelines in place for consultation relating to provisions made in policy and regulation 1163 and provide recommendations to the board through the Education Policy and Directions Committee for any necessary additions or changes. And I'll just put those in the chat right now so everyone can see them. And also I will email them.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Trustee Kwan. And that's just, again, just a reminder to folks that those are notices of motion for the combined Ed Ops meetings in March, or meeting in March. All right, folks, unless there are any other notices of motion, may I have a mover to adjourn? Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Bobby. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Good night, folks. Thanks very much.